Level 989.
Welcome to episode 4 of 989 on Health, a show where you don't need years of university to understand the latest news about health and related subjects.
An important announcement for our listeners. This podcast is intended to be an informal tool for laymen and practitioners alike to hear our viewpoints on health and wellness. Don't rely on the information in this podcast as an alternative to medical advice from your doctor or other professional healthcare provider. For the full disclaimer, please see our website.
I'm Mike Davalos, just a guy, an average Joe. If I open a book, there better be pictures. And I'm joined by the opposite of average, Brandon Weintraub, a primary care physician. Good morning, Brandon.
And a very good morning to you, Mike.
We have some follow-up from episode 3, which was about exercise. You mentioned data about some folks that were considered overweight according to the body mass index who actually had longer lifespans, but a definite decline in overall health. 2 questions about this. One, what does that really mean? I mean, if I'm overweight, I might live longer but suffer more? That doesn't really sound like advice you'd get from healthcare professionals, unless you meant it as a scare tactic.
Well, more than anything, it was intended as a warning about scientific methods, statistical analysis, and relying too much on any one tool as the sole measurement of your goals and success. I had mentioned using the body mass index, or BMI, as a method to determine how important it could be to adjust your exercise routine and weight. There are a lot of people out there that would take that advice and take it to extremes, worried that because they aren't at the low end of normal, they need to push harder and harder, or their health and longevity is going to suffer. My statement was meant to relay basically an important fact. Even when you choose to use the most up-to-date reports and statistics, or even when you use government-approved and accepted standards, there can be conflicting information. So even though the BMI says you're normal weight, you might live more years if you're slightly in the overweight category. In some cases, you'll see people who are in the overweight category having increased health risks. But that doesn't mean that you're going to remove the statistical risks by pushing yourself too far, too hard, and too fast. The BMI is just one tool, one possible method a patient can use to help determine how much work they really need to do. But it's important not to focus on it alone, and not to focus on any one tool on its own as the sole measuring device for your health.
Okay, so as for the BMI, I'm 5'8" or so, and according to the BMI chart, if I'm reading it right, which is debatable by the way, why are these charts so weird? I should weigh about 140 pounds, which, full disclosure, is about 45 pounds less than I weigh right now. I could definitely stand to lose 25 pounds, but at 45, I might definitely start to look malnourished. Question 2. If the longest lifespan is our goal, it is our goal, right? Does that mean that we need to adjust the normal and overweight ranges for the BMI chart?
Well, according to the most recent charts, your normal weight should be around 140 pounds. That would put you squarely in the middle of the range for your height. Having met you, I feel I can comfortably say that were you to lose an additional 45 pounds, you'd be doing a lot more harm than good for your health. The BMI is intended to estimate your body fat percentage, how much of your weight is actually fat and not a different type of tissue. The common misconception is that whenever someone steps on a scale and the number has gone down, that equates to a good thing. However, in cases like yours, some patients might see that big number they've got to lose, 45 pounds, and have the reaction, I need to lose 45 pounds now, time to stop eating. And if they do that, in a few weeks they're going to step on the scale, and hey, they've lost weight. The downside is that they didn't only lose fat. Their body burns muscle as well, because muscle burns so well and so efficiently. So even though they were closer to their normal weight, they'd actually lost healthy tissue as well as the little bit of fat because of their extreme reaction. So to answer your second question directly, do the values for the BMI need to be adjusted? And of course, the answer is a resounding maybe. Since the average values are constantly being tested in new ways, sometimes new studies indicate a need for change, while sometimes they indicate a need to stay the same. The best possible option is to make sure that patients recognize that these are just averages, and the numbers may not apply to them directly.
Our topic for today is sleep. Sleep is weird. For some reason, your body needs not just to rest and recharge, but to lose consciousness at regular intervals, to lose consciousness for hours on end. And there's periods during deep sleep when your brain has actually paralyzed your body so you won't hurt yourself flailing around during a dream. Some people have a disorder where they wake up but they're still paralyzed. That would be very freaky. Losing consciousness, defenseless, this doesn't seem like a good idea from a survival standpoint, especially for a little furry creature in the wilderness that's trying not to get eaten. You have to sleep or you get sick and you die. This doesn't seem to have anything to do with humans having such complex brains. Fish sleep, cats sleep. It's even possible that little microscopic life forms like blue-green algae might sleep. When I think about the medical angle or the science of sleep, I think about silly YouTube videos of people on Ambien, or X-Files episodes in the CIA and MK Ultra and KGB experiments and terrible things that happen to people that don't sleep. Most of that's probably total fantasy. You're not going to end up with mutant superpowers if only you can avoid sleep for 2 weeks. The record for going without sleep seems to be 11 days, by the way, and the guy went on to live for another 50 years if you're wondering about long-term effects. But some other guy recently, in Asia I think, he stayed up for like a week watching a sports marathon, and it killed him. So don't push that. Definitely get your sleep. But Brandon, can you tell us exactly what is sleep and what does it do for the body?
Well, honestly, I'm not sure there's a great way to answer the question, what is sleep? There's a tendency to think of sleep as a time of inactivity, that when a person is lying down sleeping, their lack of movement and responsiveness means that sleep is a time when the body slows down. On the contrary, the body actually remains incredibly active during sleep. Neurotransmitter concentrations are rising and falling. Brainwave activity goes through all sorts of interesting patterns, and the chemical and physiological processes that occur can cause a whole range of amazing results. Damaged tissues experiences increased repair rates. Your emotional and mental state is rebalanced and prepared for the next day. And in children and young adults, sleep is the time when a large amount of growth hormone is released into the body, which means that when people say things like, "I swear you grew taller overnight," they may not be as far off as you'd think.
I have no idea where the number comes from, but I seem to remember that we're supposed to get 8 hours of sleep. I personally get about 6. I could definitely use 2 more. I'm an impatient person to begin with, but when I haven't slept, it definitely affects me. I pretty much lose all ability to put up with people's BS in a polite way. So how much are you sleeping, and what should the number be for most of us?
Alright, I'll be honest. Sleep is probably the area that I need to be paying more attention to for my own health benefits. Translation, I don't get enough sleep. On average, I get about 5 hours a night, maybe 6 if I've managed to be especially productive during the day. I'd especially like to remind our listeners not to take my lack of attention to proper sleep as a license to do the same in your own lives. Sleep really is incredibly important. Fortunately for me, there actually does seem to be a consensus when it comes to how much you should be sleeping. For children and young adults, a minimum of 7 to 9 hours of sleep seems to be best for health maintenance. Adults and the elderly seem to be able to make do with a minimum of 7 hours a night. But I'd like to make sure that the stress on the word minimum for both of those age groups is clear.
And what happens if I'm not getting enough sleep? Just as a heads up, I don't know about all your polite, "It depends on the generalized non-specific impacts on the nominal homeostasis" answers. We need something flashy for the movie trailer. Maybe you're walking away from an explosion in slow motion, that kind of thing. Not enough sleep, dire consequences, go!
Well, luckily enough for me again, the effects are pretty clear when a person isn't getting enough sleep. So, too little sleep, regardless of your age, can lead to memory issues, emotional instability, and your tendency towards irritability when you don't sleep enough isn't uncommon. You can see an increased likelihood of obesity, a greater probability of developing psychiatric disorders, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension. Honestly, the list really does go on. If our listeners are interested in a bit more detail and a more complete list of health concerns that seem to be linked to people who get inadequate sleep, see our website for links to a couple of interesting studies at the National Institute of Health.
Okay, quick and easy one. What happens if I get too much sleep? Your body's just gonna wake up when it's had enough, right?
You've had it backwards with these last 2 questions. The effects of too little sleep are within limits, fairly well understood. Too much sleep, though, that's actually up for debate. There have been numerous studies that have tried to determine what happens when a person gets excessive sleep, but due to numerous different reasons, ranging anywhere from the poor definition of what excessive means, all the way to some oddities in the statistical analyses. Even today, the ramifications of sleeping too much aren't incredibly clear. One study, which can be found in one of the links from your last question, indicated that there is increased concern about mental status, obesity, and diabetes in people who sleep too much, but that the much wider list of health risks associated with too little sleep isn't present. I remember reading an article, although I couldn't find it again when I went to find it so we could post the link, that described an experiment where the participants slept between 11 to 17 hours for a number of days, and then were given a series of memory-related tasks to accomplish. And they performed significantly better when they had the excess sleep, as opposed to having what was considered a normal amount. So your body does set up its own habits, which allows you to fall asleep around the same time in the evening and usually wake up around the same time in the morning. But just because you're getting the average 8 hours of sleep doesn't mean your body doesn't need or won't let you sleep more. So you still run the risk of sleeping too much.
I have 5 questions about naps. Brace yourself. 1. How do naps impact the total number of sleep hours I need? 2. Does a nap even count as sleep? 3. If I nap for 2 hours on Sunday afternoon, do I still need 8 hours on Sunday night? 4. Is napping even a good idea? Or 5. Is it just going to throw me off?
So many questions at once. Okay, I'm going to try to be brief. I swear I can hear our listeners laughing. Question 1. Even if you take a nap, your body requires the full set of sleep cycles and deeper sleep to recuperate, regenerate, and recover. If you nap during the day, you are still going to need a full sleep cycle. Question 2. Naps do count as sleep, although you're not going to go through all the stages of REM sleep that you would over the course of a good night's rest. Question 3. If you nap for 2 hours on a Sunday, you still need to get a full night's worth of rest to get the full benefits we've described in today's podcast. The problem, though? Naps more than 30 minutes in length tend to throw off your sleep inertia, which means you're going to likely find it much more difficult to get to sleep and stay asleep appropriately. Question 4. Can I start getting long-winded and evasive again? Is napping a good idea? Well, a nap for between 10 to 15 minutes has been shown to improve cognitive function and focus almost immediately after waking up, and the effects can last up to 3 hours. A nap that is longer than 30 minutes generally causes a decrease in cognitive function immediately after waking, but can lead to an eventual improvement in cognition and alertness that can last for multiple hours. Those same longer naps, though, are much more likely to lead to sleep pattern disruption and all of the problems that come with too little sleep. And there does seem to be some correlation between taking regular naps and an increased risk of coronary artery disease, although the mechanisms and correlations are still questionable. Question 5. From what we've gone over, the best answer is napping might throw off your sleep schedule and cognition, but taking a brief nap of about 15 minutes or so can actually show a pretty useful benefit in terms of short-term improvement of mental function. Just be careful of those 3-hour midday weekend naps.
I wish I could nap for 10 or 15 minutes, but it takes me just a half an hour to get in the right mental state to be able to nap. Laying down for 10 minutes and getting up, that would just be like holding still for 10 minutes. It wouldn't be napping for me.
Yeah, you're not the only one. A lot of people find that taking a nap that brief never happens. It's far too easy to allow the 15-minute nap to become the 3-hour nap.
Yeah, and that definitely throws the person off. Now, I hope you'll forgive a bit of a tangent, but I promise I'll bring it back around. I depend on caffeine a lot to get through the day. I wish I was exaggerating for the podcast, but I'm drinking coffee, popping caffeine pills. No, they're not just for long-haul truckers anymore. And drinking occasional Coke in glass bottles from Mexico, baby. Although the Coke is more of a sweet treat than for the zing. Now, I have no trouble getting to sleep or staying asleep. I'm out 2 minutes after my head hits the pillow most times. So I don't think I'm overdoing it with caffeine. I calculated it earlier. I'm getting probably 700 milligrams on an average workday. Apparently that's about double the daily healthy recommended amount, by the way. Don't be like Mike, kids. But when I was researching for this episode, I came across the literal words, "Do you depend on caffeine to get you through the day?" And I was like, doesn't everyone? Caffeine isn't exactly about sleep, but it does seem to have a place in this episode. So do you use caffeine? And how do you feel about your patients taking it?
For the record, Mike's use of caffeine has given me palpitations since the day I met him, so don't think he hasn't been properly chastised by at least one of his medical advisors. I believe caffeine has its place, even for people who are trying to be as health conscious as they can. I'm a coffee drinker. I'm not a 3 cups every day coffee drinker, but it wouldn't be unusual to see me having 2 cups in the morning a few times a week. Cups being defined as a coffee cup, which tend to be a little closer to 6 ounces, not the big gulp travel mugs. There are some great studies out there about the benefits and downsides to drinking coffee regularly. We'll save the in-depth coffee talk for its own podcast. You'll thank me. So yes, I do drink caffeine, although I don't generally take it on its own, either in pill form or mixed up with guarana and sugar in the energy drink of your choice. Used sparingly, in moderation, and with caution, and or with your doctor's knowledge and consent. Caffeine can be helpful to get past slumps where you might otherwise be unable to function clearly. I've even seen instances where asthmatics, feeling an attack coming on, were able to drink a strong cup of coffee and mitigate the worst of their symptoms. They had left their inhaler at home by accident, and the caffeine, because it's a stimulant, actually acted on their lung function. Unfortunately, too many people have begun to use caffeine in any form as a substitute for adequate sleep and rest, and that's where I have a problem with its use. Without consistent, regular, and adequate sleep, the effects of caffeine become detrimental. You may feel more awake, but in actuality there's a reduction in motor skills, reduction in perception, and a reduction in recall. You've increased your alertness, but in all other ways your health is suffering.
Yeah, but caffeine's barely a drug. It's all natural, right? I mean, it was discovered by goats, little known fact. But I know there are millions of people out there either dependent on or addicted to drugs like Ambien, Lunesta, or even take amphetamines like Benadryl. Oh, wait. Antihistamines like Benadryl every night before bed. It seems like most people will go through a period in their lives when they're having trouble getting to sleep or staying asleep, and drugs might help someone get through a period like that. But it seems like more and more people are getting on these drugs and they're staying on them for years. I know we're trying not to be preachy in these episodes, but is this a real problem or a misperception?
This is definitely a real problem for a wide number of reasons. Even ignoring for a moment the individual side effects of some of these drugs, and a few of them are real doozies. Long-term use of most of these drugs has worrisome impact on the kidneys and liver, the organs that are responsible for metabolizing, or breaking down, and excreting these drugs. We've just spent a fair amount of time describing how important it is to get enough sleep, so I don't want to give the impression that there's never a time when a prescription pharmaceutical is appropriate to help. Unfortunately, more and more patients are being put on the extremely potent, potentially dangerous prescriptions to help them sleep, even when these prescriptions may not be needed or nothing else has been tried.
I mentioned before the videos of people on sleep drugs you can find on YouTube. They're pretty funny, but doing things, saying things that you don't remember later, these kind of side effects can be kind of sad and actually kind of scary when you think about it.
Right, and so let's go ahead and take into account those individual side effects I glossed over a moment ago. We can see balance issues, burning or tingling of the extremities, and we can even see situations like sleep driving or sleep eating. These are situations where the dangers of the treatment could easily outweigh the benefits. Let me give you an example. I had a patient who was on a commonly prescribed sleeping pill. Using a gas stove, they cooked and ate almost everything available in their fridge. And it didn't happen just once. This was a semi-regular occurrence, which began when they started taking the medication and didn't stop until we were able to convince their doctor to safely switch them to a different prescription. The patient would wake up in the morning, bloated and nauseous, often with at least one gas burner still cooking away when they went into the kitchen. And worst of all, they never had any memory of their actions from that last night. So we've gone over how important sleep is, but it's just as important to make sure that the risk and dangers in trying to get that sleep don't outweigh the benefits.
We're all pretty familiar, if just in name, with the Western prescription sleep aids I just mentioned. But what would the Eastern approach be? Is it tea? I might make this show into a drinking game where I toss back a shot of Jaeger every time you mention tea.
Hey, Chinese medicine does come in forms other than tea. Chinese herbal medicine has a few interesting and generally effective sleep aids in the case that a patient just needs a little bit of help getting to sleep now and again. One of my favorites, when I'm looking for kind of an infrequent and general insomnia relief, is actually called Zhenshin An Shentong. It translates roughly to sedate the heart and calm the spirit. I'll spare you the ingredient list, but I find that for cases of insomnia where mental restlessness and difficulty falling asleep are involved, it can be a great help. And yes, one of the most common preparation methods does actually involve making something like a tea. Although a better term is decoction, which is actually a more involved process during which the ingredients are actively boiled, then the liquid is poured off into a container, and more fluid is added to the same ingredients, which are then cooked a second time before the liquid is strained off and mixed together. There are also granules, which are basically powders you can pour into the beverage of your choice or just take directly, and tinctures, which are basically herbal medicines prepared in alcohol. It's important to keep in mind the formula I just mentioned is only one of a huge selection of formulas that might be used for people who are having sleep issues. It isn't as simple as going into your Western doctor and having them prescribe a sleeping pill to force you to fall asleep, or even as simple as going to your favorite website and ordering the herbal formula online because you heard it recommended. In cases where sleep is an issue, especially long-term, your acupuncturist is going to try to find and determine what's going on with the body that's causing the problems sleeping. And the formula they prescribe is going to vary pretty significantly, even from individual to individual, and even in cases where the basic symptom, say difficulty sleeping, may appear the same. I'm sorry to say it, but just going out and buying Zhenshin Anshentong isn't going to cure all the insomniacs listening in right now. There are also a fair number of acupuncture points that, in my experience, work incredibly well, especially for lack of sleep and insomnia. If you go in and talk to your acupuncturist, just make sure they know that sleep is a primary concern of yours, and they're going to go ahead and select the points that are going to work best for your individual case.
Speaking of drinking games, after a long, crazy day, sometimes it's nice to just unwind with a couple glasses of wine or a nice cocktail, generous splash of Hennessy, some maple syrup, a little soda, just take the edge off, forget about my day a little bit. Is a little alcohol before bed a bad idea?
Well, alcohol does have a sedative effect, initially anyway, so if you take a shot right before bed, it might actually help you feel tired. The problem comes later on in the night. Alcohol tends to cause a disruption in later portions of the sleep cycle, leading to a decreased overall quality of sleep. So while it might help you fall asleep, you're much more likely to find that you don't get the deep and restorative sleep you would expect.
Is there anything else we need to mention before we wrap it up?
Sleep is a very tricky aspect of health maintenance. The society we live in does not put a particularly powerful focus on rest. Work 8 hours a day, come home, cook, clean, take care of the family, play a computer game because you need to unwind. It's all too common to find excuses to stay up until 1 or 2 in the morning, more days than not. There's always something else to be done, or some little fun gathering you'd rather not miss. And of course you've got to go to the gym and exercise, because that nice podcast physician and the brilliant correspondent asking the important questions said you should. And of course you can always sleep more on Sunday to make up for the rest of the week, right? Finding the balance between what has to be done, what would be nice to accomplish, and getting adequate rest is incredibly difficult. I know for a fact that I'm not putting enough importance on adequate sleep, and I know better. It gets even harder when experiencing acute or long-term insomnia. But acknowledging just how important sleep is and changing your habits to match that understanding is a key factor to improving almost any health condition you might experience. And don't worry, now that we've gone over the basics, we'll have future episodes to give more specific advice on how you can adjust your habits to improve your quality and quantity of sleep, even without the use of herbal medicines or pharmaceuticals.
That's all the time we have for today. These are short episodes that provide a brief overview of very complex topics. Everything we say is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Licensed healthcare professionals should advise you and be aware of changes you make to any aspect of your healthcare. Every person's needs are different. The links to references we've made about news articles, medical studies, or other materials can be found at level989.com/health, along with our contact information and the complete Don't Take Medical Advice from Podcasts disclaimer. Thanks for listening, and now go health yourself. So, can I ask you something off the record, just between us? I'll be sure to cut this out. And if you don't like a question, you can just say pass.
Sure, hit me.
Okay. I'm no expert on animals, but I'm pretty sure that humans are one of the very few animals that try to go 18 hours or more without sleeping. Do you foresee a time when, just due to, more definitive medical evidence, there would be some kind of required or mandated nap periods for everyone? Like every 6 hours at school, at work, doesn't matter, it's nap time. Also, and importantly, what about some device or drug that can make getting into the nap quick and easy? Because, like I said before, it takes me a half an hour just to get in the right mindset.
Well, we went over a little bit of the research on whether napping is good or bad, or positive, negative, whether it's going to cause long-term health issues or not. And because the research still isn't as strong as I'd like it to be, I'd find it difficult to say that we're going to be seeing any mandatory nap periods in the near future. In elementary school, I'm sure we all remember that we had our little snack and then we would have a nap in the middle of the day. Whether that was for the overall health of the children or whether the teacher just needed a short break, it's been implemented and has been shown to have some positive results for young children. So it could be just as useful for adults. Without really firm evidence, I think it's going to be difficult to implement anything like that. And because the business world, for the most part, doesn't lend itself well to allowing their employees to take an hour nap, I doubt we're going to see any mandatory required naps anytime soon. It might be useful. I guess only future research is going to tell us. What was the second part of your question?
What about some kind of device or drug that can make getting, in Back to the Future 2, Doc Brown zaps Jenny with this thing and she instantly falls asleep?
Well, I'm pretty sure there are tranquilizers out there which basically do what you describe. If you're finding that you're having trouble falling asleep, if you're finding that you're having trouble staying asleep, I have no doubt that the FDA will at some point in the future approve some new device or some new drug that's going to help you resolve those issues. However, you're still going to run into the problem that there is a deeper, more concerning issue at work if you're having these sleep problems. So more than seeing a device or some sort of quote-unquote safe drug to help people fall asleep or stay asleep, I'd much rather see a refocus on understanding what causes the problems with sleep and how to resolve those at a physiological and mental level, rather than trying to cover them over with some new device.